check. I'll put my video on very, very quickly. But just a quick check, Arushi. We sent reminders, na?
Yeah, we sent.
Oh, good. Good. So all the best, Anita and Ankita. All right.
Yeah, so we are live on YouTube and we'll start recording in a bit.
I think there are a few people in the waiting room. Um,
Yeah, 3 to 4 people are there. I think close to 3 they'll all join.
hmm.
Sure. Anita, while Arushi takes care of that, I have my own copy.
Okay. That's nice to see.
So way before the idea of this book chat was hatched.
All
Hatched.
right.
It's very appropriate for conservation biology discussions.
To hatch some. Yeah, you need the, and it's a good analogy because you need everything from right temperature to sometimes sounds of rainfall to a whole bunch of things for the
Beautiful, beautiful.
to
And to
happen.
start with, you need the right partner and the right community.
Yeah, that's yeah, exactly. So I think it's a great analogy at many levels.
Excellent. I can see the writer in you, Anita. I can see the writer in
Yeah.
you.
Yeah, I think I've just done too much editing today. So yeah, this is
Great, great. We'll start at 3. People filter in. The book chats
yeah,
are
yeah.
anyway intended to be very casual and comfortable conversations. So,
No
yeah.
worries. No worries. So are you also based out of Bangalore, Karishma? I thought
I
you
mean,
were based in
I
Pune.
work out of Pune. That's right. I
Pune,
work
yeah.
out of
That's
Pune.
what I
That's
know.
right. Yeah. We met in Pune actually at
That's
ISF.
what, yeah, I
Yeah.
remember that clearly. So since I think the rest of them are based out of Bangalore, so I
That's
was
right. That's
based
right.
also doing.
That's right. See, we have quite a few people. My son and I attended your session with Sayantan and I forget the gentleman's name, but he has
Raza,
written the on
Raza,
Jamal Ara.
Raza, yeah.
Yes, yes, yes.
And that was strangely enough. I mean, I've worked with Raza over the phone, over email.
Reza.
The first time I was meeting him face to face.
Oh,
So
really? Okay.
yes, though we spent a lot of time together on due to work online, but yeah, it was our first meeting, so it was a lot of fun.
Raza.
Yeah.
That's right. Oh, we have a good turnout.
Yeah. So I think, Arushi, you can let people join eventually as they're coming. I'll just wait for 2 minutes before we start. So all right, it's 3 p.m. And as people are filtering in, we will start eventually, but I'll start with my introduction. Hello, everyone. My name is Ankita Rathore, and I am Program Manager for Science Communication Vertical at IndiaBioscience. So welcome, Anita. Thank you so much for joining us and being part of this. And uh, so I will start with your introduction. A little bit about Anita. So Anita runs Indian Pita, a book imprint with Juggernaut Books. And in addition to editing books about birds and natural history, she also writes on technology and communications. For several years, she also ran a news and current affairs publication for children called Child Friendly News. And today we will be discussing her very recent work, which was published last year, Women in the Wild, Stories of India's Most Brilliant Women, Wildlife Biologists. Okay, so this is not it. I also want to thank Juggernaut Book for not just this giveaway, but also as Karishma is holding, and I also have my copy here. I have scribbled all over it with notes. But if you won this giveaway, you will be getting a brand new copy. So we do have 3 copies, hard copies. And to win these copies, all you have to do is be active in the chat, ask thoughtful questions, thought provoking questions. And at the end of the virtual book chat, we will be revealing the lucky winners, 3 winners, and we also have a secret judge who will be judging the conversation and your questions all throughout the virtual book chat. And at the end of the chat, we will reveal the winners. So, for the people who are joining in, we do have some questions to start the conversation, but this is an open space and we have a lot of space for open Q&A from the audience. So keep chat window active and do ask questions right away. I'll probably take away your questions in the middle or we'll be taking them up at the end of the conversation, right? Okay, so maybe I will get started now. A little bit about India Bioscience. So, India Bioscience is a science facilitation organization based in Bangalore, but we work pan India and we are largely funded by Department of Biotechnology, but we also have many external funded partnerships. We work with various stakeholders like science academia, industry, government bodies broadly related to life sciences in India, and we act as catalyst, facilitator, and engagement partner to spark conversation, collaboration with all the life science community in India. And we do that through many verticals that we have at India Bioscience, like mentorship, networking, skill building, education, science communication, digital initiative, and data and policy. And to access all of this, our one-stop solution is our website, which we really update like multiple times a day. I just did that before this virtual book chat. And so you can get to know about India Bioscience, all the book chats that we are doing, and what is really happening at India Bioscience through our website. But we also have other modes of engagement like webinars, podcasts, short videos, or India Bio snippets that we also post on our various social media channels and Instagram, and virtual book chats like this. So we have India Bio Reads, where we publish a lot of e-compendia and resources for all the life science researchers and PhD researchers in India. So, and we also have exciting news that we'll be publishing 3 new compendias this coming month. And this is about DEI, funding opportunities and PhD researchers. So do keep an eye particularly on our website and this page. Moving on, this is our team, small team, but we do all the work that goes on at India Bioscience. And we all of are here in the virtual book chat. But if you meet us at the meetings or conferences, do drop in. Or if you come to NCBS campus, do drop in and come say hi. We would love that. Okay, so we are at the end of this. I don't have more slides, so maybe I will stop sharing. And we will dive right into the conversation. So if you are ready, maybe, in the chat box, you can put in some emojis or thumbs up so that so I can get to know that you're here, you are in the conversation, and maybe we can start with that. I know everyone is ready to begin their Fridays. It is a festivities weekend for sure. So yeah, I see few thumbs up. Okay, great. Great. Okay. So I'll start with saying, Anita, so your book, Women in the Wildlife, is an amazing book. It brings together the stories of many wildlife biologists in India and all women. Each chapter touches upon different aspects of their work, even about their personal stories, their losses, their triumphs. And maybe, in this chat, we might not be able to cover all of the stories, but we will touch upon many of them, and it would be like a snippet of the entire book. Okay.
Sure.
And I'm sure this book must have inspired, many younger women, but not just younger women out there, but, many out there in terms of, how to observe and conserve nature for the starters. So as Anita, before starting this book chat, we were talking about, what was your favorite chapter and how to get started. So I answered like the first chapter about Jamal Ara is my favorite chapter from the book because it so much she was a writer for 40 years, but there isn't much that is written about her. And this was the first book that I got to read even about her work and her personal life. And the second chapter about Jay Vijaya, known as the Turtle Girl, talking about doing the research on turtle research in India. She did the research on turtle in India. So, to start with, I want to talk about these two chapters. Maybe you can touch upon their curiosity and dedication and talk about their life stories a bit from the first two chapters to begin with. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Ankita. I mean, I'm glad you liked the book. And Jamal Ara, like I was telling you when you were chatting ahead of this, it was, it was a stroke of luck that Raza and I connected, and this led to the chapter being included in the book. I think it sets the perfect tone because in terms of timeline, also she was among the earliest women wildlife biologists, and her story is no less incredible because of the kind of context that she came in from. And you mentioned both her as well as Viji, and their life stories have a lot of parallels. Okay,
Yeah.
both of them,
Yeah.
sort of keen interest in wildlife, bootstrap their own careers, independent women, and I think who both, in a sense, met tragic ends. I mean, there are mental health issues that, these are threads that weave through both their stories. two brilliant women who I think who didn't get their due in terms of recognition for one, and more time, in on this planet for the other one, I think. And Jamalara's life was, I mean, if you look back at what she did and when she did, and then you look at how many disadvantages she came into the field with, it's quite incredible because she only was formally tutored until went to school until class 10, and then she got married. Her husband dumped her. She was left all alone with a small child. Her cousin took her in, and it was he who encouraged her and gave her books on birds. But obviously there was latent interest because it was something that she immediately picked up and she started. And he happened to be in the forest service, so they were staying. There were opportunities to access the forest regions of undivided Bihar, and she developed a keen interest in going to the forest, observing birds, and she was lucky enough to find other friends like the Augiers, whom are mentioned in the essay, who taught her rather how to write, how to communicate, and how to make good field notes. I mean, and she obviously picked all this up very fast because by the age of 26, she was writing and was soon being published in the Journal of the Bombay Natural History Society. So talk about that, with coming with no advantages whatsoever, finding your own way, and Madhuka talked about this later. I mean, there's when we interviewed her for a video that we shot around the book, and she talks about how in that conservative milieu, her mother would get into her field clothes. They would be like khaki pants and a shirt, and which was for a Muslim woman in the 1940s to do something like that. A single mother living on her own, to be able to wear unconventional clothing, go into the forest, collect information, read, write, communicate to the intellectuals of her time. I think she was an iconoclast at every level. And for me, and for Vijay was no less, because she grew up in Chennai, which is also happens to be my hometown, and I thought it was conservative when I was growing up in the 80s, but and she was a decade older than me, so I can understand how much more conservative it must have been for her, and to be able to do what she did, to devote her life to field work, to traveling on the bus all over Tamil Nadu, which is unheard of for a woman of her milieu.
Yeah.
And then to do as she did, she stayed in the forest in Chalakudi, doing field work on the forest game turtle. I mean, this was completely new ground that she was breaking, and I think that's a huge parallel to between both these stories, and I think that's why they're so inspiring, and I think they set the tone for the whole book.
Yeah, so even, I think a lot of work and the research went into two of these stories because, Jamal Ara not just did one thing, she did a lot of things. Even, by talking on air, on radio, like extensive literature on the on South Bihar, now Jharkhand. And even when she forayed into the pink-headed duck in the 1950s. So she
Yes.
did a lot. She did a lot of work with respect to that. And as Karishma is mentioning, Madhuka is Jamal Ara's daughter. So I also there was a point in the story when Madhuka says to the writer, like, "Do you know how did I get my name?" So
Yeah.
that was also very interesting. Yeah. So moving on, even in the introduction and even in Uma Ramakrishnan's chapter, it is noted that women in science, from Rachel Carson to Jane Goodall, have often been criticized for a supposed lack of objectivity. So, how do the stories of the women featured in this book challenge this stereotype? And we often think that passion, which drives impactful research, is still viewed as detrimental, specifically for women in science. So, do you want to comment on this?
Yeah, I think that it's an interesting point, and I think Uma's story really brought this. I think because of the way she herself spoke about this issue and how emotive she was and how
Yeah.
passionate she was about her work, and I think and as she rightly says, she says, why should I be judged by standards that are not mine? Being a scientist is not necessarily being cold and clinical all the time. It's good to have passion for your work, to speak up for what you want to achieve, and I think that's really important. I think if that's what drives you, that's what drives you. I don't think you need to be boxed. I think especially for women in science, women in this particular case, women in wildlife sciences, I think the important message there is that uh, you don't necessarily need to be defined by what came before.
Yeah.
And I think that's what she's saying. And I remember on a subsequent conversation, we were talking about this is just ahead of the launch at the Bangalore International Center last year for the book, and we spoke about this whole old boys club thing, which is an extension of
Yes.
the same thing, right?
Yes.
I mean, this is the way you're expected to behave, this is the way you're expected to talk to, this is how you should be seen with. So the whole clique. So I think. And there she spoke about how that one necessarily perhaps had to change the rules of the game by stepping out of it and not having to play the game. I think that's an important message. And of course, doing it is far more difficult than saying it, because there are costs and penalties along the way, as I think many of us who have worked in organizations know. But there is really, because you can't win in the game, you see, so why play it at all?
Yeah.
So yeah, I thought that was really a key message, and I think and I think that the essay that I wrote on Nandini Velvo also exemplifies it, because when I had never met Nandini before this, and we were still, in 21, 22, when we began talking about the book. We were still in the middle of COVID years. There were still lockdowns. Travel was still a problematic thing, and so she was traveling all over the place. I was in Delhi and in Bangalore, so we never met. So we did, over months we had conversations, emails, chats, and what came across through the digital medium even was her unmistakable sense of energy and passion for a cause, for what she was saying. There was so much energy around it, and I think that's very unique to her. I mean, when someone believes like that, it's very inspirational. And I think that's the word I heard from everyone who spoke about her, right? Because she was mentoring students in the Northeast, and and there's this energy, this wearing your passion on your sleeve,
Yeah.
that really comes across, which really is a magnet for young researchers, and there's so much to take away from that. And to extend that even further, I think in the um, in the essay we've quoted this particular article she wrote in Economic and Political Weekly about how scientists need to do more than just do research. They need to see their research being converted to action, should facilitate that transition.
Yeah.
And I think I'd like to just refer to that. In fact, I was reading that just before this call, and let me see if I can find this. Yes, yeah, I think the biologists must make the leap from simply for offering analysis to actively ensuring that the inference is incorporated into policy and persevere for a change in conservation decision making. So that this is again not cold clinical science for the sake of it.
Yeah.
And I think that's the other angle that in the book explores. Which I think is important. I mean, these are all personal choices. There is no one size fits all. But I think what these women show is that there is a diversity of boxes that you can fit into, and that it doesn't have to be the same box for everyone.
Yeah. So I think you almost answered this question, which we have from Thamalarasi Kandasamy. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. So the question,
Swami, yes. I mean, yeah, you got
so
that.
the question is, what are all some of the common qualities of women you have mentioned in the book?
What are some of the common
Common
qualities?
qualities of women in the book from all the chapters. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I think one is definitely huge amount of commitment.
Yeah.
I think, and two is the diversity of approach. If you look at the background of all these women, not all of them studied wildlife sciences. In the case of Jamalara, there was no education at all, with hardly any formal education.
Yeah.
Others, of course, are highly qualified in the traditional academic sphere. But I think a single-minded determination to move forward. Okay, I think in terms of what they wanted to do, and they were willing to do everything that got them there.
Yeah.
I think
Very
that's what
passionate. Yeah.
stands out.
Yes.
I think that's true not just for this profession but for any other profession. But I think here the challenges are so unique, and I think they challenge stereotype and gender at so many levels that this journey becomes very, very interesting. I hope I've answered that question.
Yeah. So Usahasi Roy asks that what is your favorite part of the experience of working on this book?
Right. I mean, it was interesting, okay, because when I began the book and we began making a list of who we could write about in the book, we were looking at outcomes. You know, we were looking at women who had had significant impact on conservation, on species conservation, on preserving habitats, on making change happen on the ground. So these were some of the outcomes we were looking at, and so that was the whole dominant thread in the process of creating the book. But as I wrote the two chapters that I wrote, and I started editing the book and bringing it together, the journeys became so incredibly important. And there was so much I learned, not from the outcomes but from the journeys.
Yeah.
And you know, and the fact that there are so many different pathways to get to somewhere, they don't necessarily have to be in a very linear way to go from A to B. I think that was a personal learning for me, and it gives you the courage to think that maybe there are more than two ways to bell the cat.
Yeah, so this is also my question. Probably I was going to ask probably at the end, but since this is up, I also wanted to praise that I really like the long form pieces in this book and how they were written. So my question also was that how did you go about selecting the people, like the women, for the stories? Was that a particular process? What the process was like?
Okay, it was quite strange. Like everybody, I mean, I think like all of us do. There were so many ideas in terms of who one could feature, and there was a very long list. I mean, I spoke to a lot of people who've been in the wildlife space, friends, people who are scientists in the space. You know, in terms of who one could talk about as you know, and whom one could include in the book. There was a very long list, and I've said this at every forum. This is not an exhaustive list. I mean, this book just has 13 women, and that's simply because that's the amount of space we had. I mean, we had a publishing budget in terms of the size of the book that we could produce, and I was very clear that we were not going to do 50 profiles. You know, if there were 50 profiles, each profile will get 2.5 pages or 3 pages, and that was not the way. That wouldn't do justice to what I really wanted to talk about, because I think I sort of anticipated that the journeys and the details of how they got where they got would be extremely interesting, and you can only explore that in a very nuanced long form kind of narration. You can't do it in 3 pages. In 3 pages, we tend to box them, right?
Yeah.
There's no nuance. What nuance can you explore in 3 pages? It's very hard, you know. So I mean, it's that's not so. The form fitted the function in this case, you know. So then it had to be about how do we then pick the 9 or 10, 12, 13 pieces that we could do for this. So, and I think I must have been floundering as usual. So, and I had this long conversation with someone whom many of you may know, Ramki Srinivasan, who started Conservation India. So Ramki and I had a long chat. He was among the people who sort of bounced off with me ideas of who one could write about. And he said, Anita, all this is very fine, but you have to have a criteria to be able to justify to yourself, forget the outside world, in terms of who would you finally include in the book, because without it, you're never going to be able to have the backbone to say that this is what the book has to be about. That forced me to create criteria and then figure out, you know, at least these 13 profiles simply had to be there, because this was the first book of its kind. That puts a certain requirement in terms of you can't get too micro, you can't get too focused on one area. You want to be able to talk about a variety of women working in a variety of different parts of the wildlife business. So, you know, that conversation, I think, was it really a changing point for me in terms of how I was looking at the book, and it became far more serious and far more focused from that point onward.
Yeah, so as I was telling you before, that I really liked the flow of the chapters. It started with Jamal Ara and ended with younger biologists. So that was
Yeah.
amazing for me. It created the right hook to read the book cover to cover. So we have a question by Joshi. Like, what are the technical hurdles that women faced in wildlife, and if there are any anecdotes from the book? So here I wanted to bring up that there are so many notes of gender issues and sexism touched upon in this book, and there are so many anecdotes, and I have a few that I've written over here. That, like, Divya Karnat says that her rural project location in Odisha was not at all female friendly, and she was the first person to go out there and buy things for herself. And even in Divya Mudapa's case, sexist jokes are mentioned in the field, or Vijaya traveling in train wearing collared shirt, to avoid eye teasing, and many more instances from Uma's chapter as well. So, giving this troubling accounts of harassment, do you want to comment on it? Comment on it, and if the women who are coming in the wildlife conservation right now, are the situation better in this case?
In terms of the sexism and the gender?
Yes, and gender issues, yes.
Yeah, I mean, if you last time when I was talking with other young people in this space, I think this is definitely an issue, and I think there are many sort of aspects to this. It starts right from women who have to convince their parents that they can go into wildlife sciences. And I remember I was in Hyderabad talking about the book. I think not at the literary festival. And there was this young girl who came up to me and said, "Thank you so much for coming and talking." Said, "This is my father. Now he knows this is actually a legitimate space, and there are people writing books about it." So he said, it starts from there, in terms of it's not a safe place, it's not what women do. Can't you find a safer thing to do? That's the first. That's the first, and probably the most sort of gentle kind of nudge that you start feeling. Okay, when you start thinking about wildlife sciences, I think there are far more serious issues when you're actually in the field, and those are the examples we've talked about in the book about women who face sexism from colleagues, from people they're working with, from the forest department staff. I mean, it runs long. I mean, I think these are problems that don't go away because they're part of a larger issue in society, right? So, I mean, as long as that doesn't go away, this is not going to go away. It's one is just an extension of the other, and this just gets aggravated because these women tend to work in remote areas, and during times of day when the whole world is not afoot. So that creates its own challenges and problems. Yeah.
So there's this very interesting question by Murli here that I'm unable to find a Wikipedia page for Jamal Ara. Does she have one?
No, I don't think there is one actually. I mean, there's hardly any content on Jamal Ara whatsoever. And I want to share this since Murli's brought this up. I want to share this little story. Jamal Ara was on my list for this book forever from the beginning, and couldn't find anyone who knew anything. I mean, I spoke to everyone, and I remember this conversation I had with Ashish Pitti, who runs the Indian Birds Journal, who's also an Indian Pitta author. I mean, as how little published material there actually was. And I think Ashish has written the bibliography of South Asian ornithology. So, and if he can't find information, then I don't think anyone else can. So, so she went into the list of people who may make it. So then I said, okay, we'll worry about it later. Then I happened to be introduced to Raza Kazmi, and Raza and I were talking about something completely different on the phone. And then I told him, "Oh, we're doing this book." And then he tells me, "Anita, it's really interesting you mentioned it because I'm actually doing this research on this amazing woman ornithologist who lived in Bihar, and she was completely self-learned, and she did this amazing work that no one knows about." So I'm saying, "Raza, are you telling me you're researching Jamal Ara?" He said, "Yes, and half the chapter is already written. I'm writing this for some long form website." I said, "Hold the thought. Do not give it to the long form website. You please write a book chapter, and then we will release it as a long form story to any website of your choice. But let's do the book because this is the key chapter for the book," and it started from there. So it was a chance conversation with somebody whom I had no idea was working on Jamal Ara at all, and I think it produced a really, really brilliant chapter. So the long answer to Murli's question is no.
Yeah, so I think there are many people who are asking also, like, where does the Madhuka name come from? Like, what is the story about that, behind that?
Yeah, so that's what she said. She's named after the Mahua tree. I think if I remember right, it's the.
Yes.
Let me look up the exact scientific name. It is the Mahua indica, I think, which is the keystone tree of the Chotanagpur Plateau, which also happened to be one of Jamal Ara's favorite trees. Yeah, Madhuka indica is a Mahua tree.
Yeah.
So she's named after that.
Yeah.
Though I think Jamal Ara writes very lyrically about plants and I think about flora as much as fauna. And if any of you happen to read the book, don't miss the chapters in the section where she writes about the strobillions flowering in the Chotanagpur Plateau. It's the same as Neelakurunji that most of you would be familiar with from the Western Ghats, but this is in Bihar, and I didn't even know it blew that a similar flower blooming cycle would happen there, and she writes so lyrically about it, and it's unbelievable. So it's hard to believe that this lady was untutored. She didn't have a formal education. The style and the content and the language are masterful. I mean, it's really one of my favorite pieces of quoted text in the book, and it's simply lovely. And if we have a moment, we should just read it because it's just among the most loveliest pieces of writing. And to be able to actually read Jamalara's own words, I mean, it really gives you a, it really gives you a, it makes your hair stand up. So yeah.
I mean, yeah, the story where Madhuka talks about like how she rented a car and just went off to document these in Horha Forest is just
Yes.
amazing. And it's an, I think, 41 page number,
Yeah, I'm just looking for
Anita.
that passage.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Yes. So she says that, sorry. And that's what she says, that see Naples and dye is what Jamalara writes. I would alter it to see the Strobelian's flower and dye. And her description of, these were really her favorite flowers, and her description is absolutely lyrical. And she writes, this is Jamalara's own words. Since November 1953, over 800 square miles of forest in the Singhbum district have been carpeted with the deep purple-blue flowers of this species. The shaded hill slopes and the valley bottoms for miles on end are smothered under it, and one motors along the forest roads as if in a blue haze, assailed by the heavy camphor like aroma of the flowers. If some Wordsworth had seen it, he would have promptly consigned his daffodils to the ash can and written another about the Strobelians. Whichever way you turn, whichever side you glance at, there's nothing but the Strobelians in flower to arrest your roving gaze. As far as the eye can see, the carpet extends in fascinating luxuriance and blue brilliance, a sight fit for the angels themselves, so much beauty scattered over the earth. So it's really lovely writing, and I think now the some of the NCBS archives is digitizing some of Gajamalara's papers. So I think it should soon be up, and all of you would be able to go online and read her in her own language, and I think it's really lovely.
I think that's great. So if you are interested, probably you can visit the archives and their website and see what's coming up. So there's this interesting question from Payal Joshi, which says that has the book reflected on how gender drove wildlife sustainability work in terms of policy or something along the lines? This is also my question with related to the science data also informs policy, and there are many instances these are mentioned in the book, like in Uma's chapter, there's this thing that work on tiger genetics led to the improvision of building NH7. Like something related to it was mentioned. So, do you want to talk about it? That
In terms
particular,
of having an, yeah,
and how is policy informed through science and data, and
yeah, I
specifically
think
in
that's a
case
great
of wildlife.
example. Yeah, it's a very straightforward example because the whole tiger census method was altered by the availability of a genetic framework, right? Where you're not depending on just camera traps or even just site records or pug marks to be able to ascertain the number of tigers in the landscape. But you're actually able to look at individual data that would be able to identify each individual, and therefore you'll be able to extrapolate your and arrive at a count number in a far more scientific manner. So yeah, I think her work has had directly translated into policy outcomes in that sense. And also look at something like what Vijay did. I mean, if you remember,
Yeah.
if any of you are as old as I am, you remember sometime in the 1980s, India Today carried this shocking article about Olive Ridley massacre
Yes.
on the Orissa coast. I mean, it was
Yeah.
grisly. I mean, those images were really awful. And I remember the images. I remember reading that issue of India Today when I was very young. And it turns out that Vijay was the one who took those photos. And I think the massacre shocked Indira Gandhi so much that she ordered the Coast Guard to maintain vigil in the waters of the coast of Bitarkanika. I think it was Bitarkanika or the other beach, Gahir Mata in Orissa, while during the nesting season, and that order holds good even today. So even I think even today, if I'm not mistaken, when the nesting season of the olive ridley is on, the coast is patrolled by the Coast Guard boats. So you can, so in a sense, conservation action can guide policy, be it at a tactical level, as Vijay's example sort of elaborates, or at a more macro level, as Uma's work illustrates.
So we have a question by Bhagyashri Patil. And she says that the content of the book sounds very interesting. Thank you for the meeting. Thank you, Bhagrashi. And her question as a teacher is that how this book will help middle class and senior school girls who are interested in wildlife environmental sciences to pursue their interest as a future career.
Right. I think, yeah, I think it will tell you in great granular detail what you can expect out of a career in wildlife, the good and the bad, and the very ugly too. So I think that's where it should really help people looking for information on whether this will work for me, is it a fit for me, because it gives you an idea of the kind of hours you will work. It will give you an idea of the kind of work that you will be doing, of the kind of challenges that you might be facing, and thereby the qualities that you need to have to cut it. So I think if you look at the details of the journeys, I mean, I think it will paint a vivid picture of what you can expect from a life as a biologist in the wild.
Yeah. So related to it, there's a question by Karishma, and she asks that being their work, there are indicators that these trailblazers and indomitable personal challenges, health and society being two major themes, and how can we prepare our future women for the realities of, being dreamer and doer?
Yeah, I think you have to just look at the kind of impact these women had, and I think that should give enough motivation. I think for people in terms of the fact that you can actually make a difference and make a change, and I think that's the paradigm shift. I think. Yeah, I know. Does it answer your question, Karishma? I'm not sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's the motivation, it's the passion that will probably help them tide over tough times.
Yeah, and being very clear-headed in terms of what to expect, right? Because if it comes to an engineering career, an IT career, people pretty much know what's expected out of them. And I think you want to be able to answer the question for this as well, and in a positive manner, and not without not frighten people away or say, oh my God, look how difficult it is. That's not the point. Yeah.
So Payal Joshi asks that is there a mention of the chapter on tiger project or tiger population? So Payal, we do have a chapter on Uma Ramakrishnan in this book, known as the India's Wildlife Detective. So either you win this book or you buy this book, you will get to read it then. So Anita, coming to the chapters that you authored
Yeah.
in the book, and based on the chapters like Divya's work on sea turtle conservation and fishing communities, or Nandini's work on the Nature Interpretation Center in Tipi Range. So, can you address the role of community in conservation efforts? Like, so for example, for me, when I read the Divya's work, there was a section which says that most farmers and consumers remain clueless about fish farms and how these fish farms comes through fish pellets which are eventually made from the fish which is caught from oceans, and it eventually pushes us down the food chain and increase the carbon footprint anyway. So in terms of any examples from both of the chapters that you authored, can you talk about how integrating the local perspectives and need can be better for effective conservation?
Yeah, I think Divya's chapter it has lots of examples because her work is so community centric at some levels, right?
Mhm.
So she's gone from studying, looking at marine creatures, their issues and their threats, to understanding how they link in to our lives and our food plates, you know, and it's very I think what her clear message is that you need to work with the fisher community before you can make an impact in the sea, because that's what's driving the demand supply cycle, and you need to change the dynamics of that cycle. And if you look at that cycle, it essentially includes the people who are fishing, which is the fisher folk. It includes consumers. It includes the people in between, like people who are say online meat delivery services, who are procuring these kind of meats and selling them in the market, fish market operators,
Yeah.
restaurants who are major consumers of catch. So and these are all, you have to see all of these as part of the community. And I think so. I think she's got a great understanding of what constitutes the community that she ought to be addressing. And it's not just the community of fisher people alone. It's the picture is much wider and much larger. And in a sense, unless you work on demand, on the demand side, which is the consumer side, how can you address problems at the supply side? So it's a very it's a very social science, very an economist way of looking at the whole looking at an ecological problem, and I think that's really interesting. Um, and I think community-based conservation models also, I think Nandini's work also talks about that in great detail. It so happened that I wrote both those essays, and both of them had very similar themes, and both surprisingly enough were from the same batch of NCBS, I think. So there were so many parallels to that story.
Yes.
So, again, I think this was her doctoral work, and where she looked at what is happening in the community forests around Eagle Nest, and looked at how species were performing there vis-a-vis within the sanctuary, and because those are community managed forests vis-a-vis Eagle Nest, which is a sanctuary, right? So, and then she found that different kinds of animals were using different kinds of landscapes, and those were actually one was actually as important as the other, which underlines the importance of community-based conservation models. You can't ignore one for the other. I think that's the important message there.
Yeah. So we have one more question. So we are at 3:40. So we'll take up the questions in next 5 minutes more if you have. If you have any questions, do put them in the chat box. So there's a question which says, have you touched upon the wildlife species which are under threat of extinction?
No, that didn't guide this book, honestly, because that requires a different kind of book and a different set of questions to be asked, because some of these biologists are not necessarily working on species that are close to extinction, though some are. I mean, there are enough threatened species mentioned through the chapters, but that wasn't the focus of this book.
Yeah. So we have another question which says, a great book by a great author. So this book has a lot of authors. And would you like to mention or comment about those wildlife women biologists who were left out and were not included in the book that you wanted to? It's an interesting question, yeah.
Yeah, there was a whole bunch of them, and I'm not going to give away any names, but certainly I plan to do a follow-up book, because there are so many women who need to be talked, whose work needs to be talked about. So I think if you look at women in wildlife, I think the picture is much larger than even wildlife biologists. There are women now at every sphere, from communication to education to I think the forest services, as field staff, as frontline workers. You are now seeing them at so many levels, and I think all of those are really important. So yeah, but there are, like I said, this is just to use a very poor cliche. This book is just the tip of the iceberg, because we just didn't have room. We had to bring out an encyclopedia next. That's the only way we could have done justice to all the women and all the work, because all their work is interesting, and and all their work is important.
Yeah.
In so many ways, because because this field itself is new for women. Bulk of the women have joined the field in the last 15-20 years, and more are joining every year. So this is the point of inflection. I think we are really at a point of inflection, and everything that these women do will set the base for what comes after.
That's true. And yeah, please bring out the next part as well. We will be really looking forward to it. So there's a question by Payal Joshi. So thank you, Payal, for bringing up this question, because she says that I read some of the work about Usha Ganguly. Could you share some features of her work in conservation and learning takeaways from women scientists like her?
Yeah. Yes, I think the Usha is unique, because if you look at her, she began her career with BNHS, then she relocated to Sikkim, and she joined the government of Sikkim. She worked in a government organization, ran their biodiversity, finally headed their biodiversity board by the time she retired, and she worked from within the system to make change happen. And that sometimes, as we all know, has huge challenges. It's not easy being in the government, because then you are, you can't point fingers and say, oh, the government has to do this, because you are the government, you ought to be doing it. So, and therefore, I think it's really unique and inspiring as to how she worked within the system to make change happen. did pioneering work in terms of mapping the biodiversity of Sikkim, going into remote areas, which of course now many of these areas are far more accessible to tourists. But I think when she did the initial surveys, first for BNHS, later for Sikkim government, these were areas no one had ever been to, and required trekking, walking, documenting, and talking to people, bringing the whole angle of conservation in where it was not even an issue. I think, in a sense, that was really the importance of her work, and really that's what exemplifies her conservation contribution, and that's why she's in the book.
So, one question that I wanted to ask is that in the introduction you mentioned that in Divya's chapter, which is written by Shweta Taneja, she describes the conservation as a constant struggle of swimming upstream in a river filled with sand. So I really liked the way she described it. But
Yes.
so can you talk about few of the struggles related to conservation in India?
I think Shweta writes about it really evocatively.
Yeah.
And I think that's Divya Madapa's story is a story of how many challenges you overcome, right? You first they were trying, if you're doing rainforest restoration, the first was even trying to understand how rainforests could be restored, which how do you pick the seeds that will work, how do you plant them so they will flourish, and then two, how do you find a site where you can do your experiments, and then how do you scale that work. I mean, there are questions around botany, there are questions around the technical aspects of managing a rainforest. There are interface issues with government, with corporates who are running these coffee estates in which these rainforests are happening. There's human management in terms of people and resources. There's human wildlife conflict because there's a lot of that was happening in Valparai. And so she says in there, say you begin your day with looking at roadkill on the road, then later on to managing some human resource issues, and you're trying to raise funds for research, you're writing some proposals, you're writing reports for donors. I mean, how much work is all that? I mean, and that's why you say this is not a career. It's really something you do only when you're deeply inspired to do it. So yeah, these are all the different facets of the business that you need to be able to deal with if you want to succeed in the conservation game.
Yeah. Payal says it's such an engaging session by far, which she had while sipping coffee. Thank you so much, Payal. So I really have a, kind of last question from my side. And if audience has any question, they can let me know or raise their hands. We will unmute and you can ask your questions to Anita. A very fun question, and even for the audience and the India Bioscience team. So, and to you, Anita, of course. So can you name your favorite bird? If you have read the book from the book or just otherwise, so I have started observing birds just, in last 1 year or so by being in the NCBS campus, and thanks to Manjula, our after lunch walks, that she has started telling me this is that word, this is that word. So if you have a favorite bird, do let us know.
If the question is to me, then it's a very hard ask because
Yeah.
every bird you see, I mean, I don't think I've ever met a birder who's answered this question well. So I will also flub it, and I will say that it's all about like, and it's not even a bird I've seen. Like a friend of mine, the Arctic tern has made an appearance in Bombay, driving everybody crazy because this bird has come to India after scores of years. And obviously, all the storm activity in the Arabian Sea, thanks to climate change, is pushing all these birds inward.
Yeah.
And the Arctic tern has arrived, and it's among the most beautiful birds that one can ever hope to see. And if you look at the flight of terns, I mean, it's beguiling. I mean, I think I spent watching that video multiple times on on continuous mode because I thought it was simply among the most beautiful things I've ever seen. And I think so. For me, my current favorite bird is the Arctic tern, and unfortunately, I'm stuck in Delhi, unable to go to Bombay, unable to see the Arctic tern. So one has to content oneself with the videos, but that's okay. So yeah, so current favorite is Arctic tern. I mean, as difficult to see as can ever be, but and it will change all the time. And I think for any birder, this is a question that will, you can ask them which is the bird that gave you the hardest time, which is the bird that you found the easiest, and stuff like that is okay. But favorite is a hard one.
Yeah. Karishma says kingfisher.
Like all birds have such, I mean, every bird is unique, right? And they have
Yeah.
such amazing behaviors that, yeah, it's hard to pick, right?
Yeah. So I'm sure, documenting the lives of all these women is definitely is a monumental task. And you, Anita, with all the other authors of the book has brought out really well. And I think sharing their stories is a well-deserved tribute to their work and their lives. So I think we tried to condense as much information that was possible for all the stories of women in the book. And for the audience, if you want the book, just buy it, or probably we'll in next 2 minutes we'll be announcing who the secret judge was and who are the three lucky winners. So if you have won the book, probably you get to read it as well. So over to the secret judge.
In case you were wondering. Okay, so I am the secret judge, and the secret judge had to dress in theme with the book chat. So you see, I have ducks on my t-shirt. So that was the giveaway. If they use their powers of observation. All right. So it's been a wonderful session. Ankita, absolutely wonderful questions, wonderful engagement. Thank you, Anita, for writing the book. This, could never have happened if the book wasn't there. Special thanks to Juggernaut Books. They're right here for coming on board so quickly, just in response to an email and sharing copies of the book that we could now use for this giveaway. So thank you very much again, Ankita, Anita, and Team India Bioscience for putting all of this together. Above all, our participants make the book chats worthwhile. I don't know what we would be doing without you in the room. So lots of you answered lots of amazing questions, but we have only 3 books to give away. So I hope you understand where we are coming from. It's a resource limitation. We have 3 winners for the complimentary copies. I will announce your names now, and you can send an email to hello@indiabioscience.org, and we will ship a copy of the book to you. So the three winners are of our free complimentary book giveaway, thanks to Indian Pita Books and Juggernaut Books. Payal Joshi. Give me a minute, please, guys. I want to say it right. Tamilarisi Kandasamy. Congratulations, Tamilarisi. And one exceptional participant, Murli Murugavel. We want men to read about women in the wild as well.
Yes,
and
and
get a trip on the wild side of life. So Payal, Tamilarisi, and I hope I got that right. I'm so sorry if I didn't. And our other winner also, Tamilarisi, that's right. And let me say it correctly again, please. Just give me a second. And Murli, please email us at hello@indiabioscience.org, and we will ship you your complimentary book copy. Over to you, Ankita.
Thank you so much, Karishma. So we do also have a feedback form for you to fill because we want these book chats to continue. So please guide us, tell us what worked better, which books you want us to bring to you. So please fill the feedback form. We have the QR code as well. And another thing is that one of our writers wrote about the review of this book on the IndiaBioscience website. So I think Arushi has put the link in the chat box. So if you are interested, probably who haven't won the won the book, probably can go and read that review. Yeah. Thank you so much, Anita, for
thank
joining
you for
us
having me.
and taking time out of your busy schedule for us, and Juggernaut Books, Vyoma and Zoya as well, for shipping these books to us. And even I got a book to read. I have scribbled all over it for sure. So thank you so much. And we'll keep having these book chats. So do fill the feedback form and let us know what book we should cover next. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much all to all the participants. I think I will
Sounds good.
stop sharing.
Certainly, certainly. And the feedback form link is there for anyone else who wants to give us their feedback. Thank you, everybody. So good to see you all.
Thanks
Well
a
done,
lot.
Ankita.
Have a great evening.
You too.
It was nice, Ankita.
Thank you, Manjula. Have a great weekend.
Thank you, and you too.
Yeah.